Welcome. The gift of sight is not the same thing as the gift of insight. Thankfully, many of us enjoy the blessings of sight. All right, corrective lenses, bifocals, progressive lenses, reading glasses, whatever it takes. By and large, most of us are able to make some visual sense of the world around us and to read text in at least one or two languages, if not more, and communicate with the written word as well as with the spoken word. So it makes sense to us that this week's parsha begins with an imperative to see, re'eh. More specifically, see, I have set before you this day blessing and curse. Re'eh nasati lifnechem hayom bracha uklala. The Torah is telling us that we have a choice, and as we analyze the choice, the point to ponder is that to make that choice well, we need not just sight, we also need insight. Our encounter with COVID-19 this year has led to some fascinating sights in our world. Among the ones that were most striking were among other places in Venice. There were photos on the internet this spring of the canals of Venice, which are usually brown with silt and muck. But because we were all quarantined and tourism evaporated, the canals ran clear, and there were videos of fish swimming in the waters, even dolphins and swans, and a beautiful video of a jellyfish gliding along in those waters that have appeared filthy for decades, if not centuries. The Himalayan mountains are about 200 kilometers from New Delhi, closer than from here to Halliburton, but no one has seen those mountains from India for 30 years because of the air pollution. When the shutdown set in and industry and transportation all but froze, people were dazzled by being able to see the beauty of those mountains for the first time in a long time. The dramatic drop-off in air pollution over China was reported to be visible from space. Those are just some of the things that were visible, became visible to the naked eye. It takes a little bit more awareness, though, to appreciate what was visible using insight. That parsha that we're reading this week tells us that being placed in front of us is bracha uklala, blessing and curse. This last few months have presented us with just that. Many people chose the curse route. The economy collapsed, we're stuck inside our houses, we can't go out and do what we want to do, live the life we want to live, and so on and so on. So things went from bad to worse. People spent the entire summer watching Netflix because they hadn't been watching enough internet up to that point. They feel they needed more. I can't go out for a haircut or to get my nails done, so I might as well wear pajamas all day and eat ice cream 3 meals a day. Others took it the opposite way and saw it as a blessing. Maybe a blessing in disguise, maybe a silver lining. Somebody told me about a platinum lining. Why not hope for the best? Time to clean the house, time to catch up on reading that they hadn't had time to do up till that point, time to bake fresh bread, time to talk with friends and family, catch up on old connections, somehow got lost in the fray of the day-to-day. Time to reflect, time to write. And most unsettling and risky and important of all, time to spend a little time with ourselves. Bit of introspection, bit of soul searching. What do I actually want to be when I grow up? More on introspection as we go through the month of Elul, which starts this week. But I'll tell you just one story that I heard from someone. I shared it in some of the shiurim, but I think it bears repeating. Someone who's a dedicated minyan goer on Bathurst Street told me once lockdown happened about his experience. He said he'd always had trouble davening in shul, even though he'd been doing it his whole life. Seems this chazan was always going too fast, that one goes too slow. Someone was saying Yehesh Me Rabbah so loud, it wrecked concentration. It's always hard to stay focused on the prayers. All those other people around. So day one of lockdown, puts on talis and tefillin, starts davening. Guess what? Same problems, mind wandering, distracted, thinking of other things during davening. Hard to stay focused, only with one big difference. Now there's nobody else to blame it on. So he said, maybe the problem's with me. That's an uncomfortable realization to come to, but a very real one. A comedian once said, I can go for a long time without many of the other essentials of life, paraphrasing here, but I can't make it through the day without at least one good rationalization. It's always good to have a reason why we can't do this or can't do that, can't study, can't daven properly. What's a better impediment to religious practice than a shul or those rabbis? Don't get me started. Well, there we were, Shabbos after Shabbos after Shabbos, just us in the siddur and all the time and peace and quiet in the world. Well, it wasn't always easy, but hopefully sometimes, maybe not every week, but once in a while, we actually took full advantage of the time and frame of mind to daven with a clear head and an open heart. And that takes insight. We'll need even more of that in the weeks to come, because this Shabbos is Shabbos Mevorchim. We're thankfully going to have a minyan again this Shabbos in Shul, and we'll say the blessing for the new month of Elul, which begins next Thursday and Friday. We always announce the time for the reappearance of the moon in Jerusalem, the eternal and undivided capital of Israel, which will be this Wednesday early morning at 1:54 and 16 parts. Moiled wird sein in Jerusalem, Mittwoch in der Früh, 54 Minuten, mit 16 Chalakim nach einer Zeger. Now, let's go back to those fish that we were talking about swimming along in the newly clear waters, just for a few minutes, if you don't mind. The Torah reading we'll hear this week describes to us the details of kosher animals, kosher birds, kosher beasts that we're permitted and we're not permitted to eat. And there are reasons given. The ruminants are kosher and they're permitted to us, animals that chew their cud. Message being to us that we're also supposed to ruminate, not necessarily chew our cud, but to think over, to ruminate, to ponder carefully over our thoughts and actions that demand attention and caution. Birds of prey with claws we should avoid, and so on. We never talk too much about the fish. I grew up on the West Coast eating a lot of salmon and not thinking about it very much. I love fish. Actually, if I loved fish, I would leave them alone and let them keep swimming happily along. I guess really I love myself, and I love the way fish tastes in my mouth. So that's where the love is. I got a fish smoker for Father's Day a couple of years ago, so the kids have been making the amazing maple glazed smoked salmon. I'll eat lox, I'll eat sushi, herring, you name it. If it has fins and scales, I'm in. Let's talk about the fish for just a minute. The determinants are just that for fish. It has to have fins, it has to have scales. It has to have both because they're both significant. Scales are really armor that protects the fish, similar to our own armor, our Yira Shamayim, our awe of heaven, according to the Gemara and Tractate Shabbat. That's our integrity that helps us choose the right path, even when it's difficult. And it protects us from the pitfalls of life. And fins are, of course, what? The means by which the fish moves forward. We have to ask ourselves, what helps us move forward? Being observant isn't enough, just having that armor of scales. Yira Shamayim, that's a key of Jewish life. Whatever we're doing, though, whatever situation we're in, we have to keep moving forward. That's the Jewish people. We have to use any opportunity, every opportunity, sometimes even create opportunities where they don't seem really apparent, for growth, for development, for learning, positive change, connection, refinement. We could have given up our learning and davening this summer. We didn't. We just moved it onto Zoom, did the best we could, and we kept moving forward. The Talmud in that same tractate suggests that fish, which can swim, any fish which can swim upstream, is a kosher fish. Very interesting, that idea, implying that sometimes, oftentimes, we have to fight against the tide, however strong it is. In Tractate Avodah Zarah of the Talmud, the sages speak about the idea of a fish having a spinal cord, a backbone, which is what allows it to fight the tide, fight the current, and swim upstream. We're all familiar with the expression of having a backbone. It means you stand up for what's right. You can buck the tide. You can be a lone voice for morality and justice. Who knew? We learned it all from fish. But if you think of a couple other occurrences of fish in Jewish life, the picture comes into even clearer focus. Not just lox on a bagel on Sunday morning, even more than that. There are mazalot that we just read in the Kinos of Tisha B'Av, parallel to signs of the zodiac. Mazal Dagim, the mazal of the fish, is the month of Adar, Purim, the happiest month of the Jewish calendar. The blessing, the bracha that Yaakov Avinu gives at the end of Bereshis to Ephraim and Menashe, his grandsons, is Vayidgu Larov. May you multiply greatly. The word he uses is dag, specifically the word for fish, Vayidgu. Be like fish, multiply like anything, and swim in huge schools together. A few weeks from now, on our Rosh Hashanah table, the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch suggests that we have an elaborate fish course in the Rosh Hashanah meal as a sign, among the pomegranates and the apples and honey, as a sign that we too become numerous like the fish in the sea, and also that we be like the head, leaders, and not like the tail, followers. On the second day of Rosh Hashanah, we'll go to a river, ideally a river with fish in it, and we'll say Tashlich, mentioning those prophetic verses about casting our sins into the sea. Why do we go to such trouble to go to a body of water that has fish? Because the fish's eyes are open all the time, as God's eye, which takes note of all our actions, even those which we may try to hide from ourselves. Also, because fish are completely surrounded with water all the time. That's the environment they absolutely must have to live. If you take them out, they can't endure for very long at all. Just like us, we need to be in an environment of Torah. That's our environment, that's our life supply. A Jew removed from Torah for any reason is like, I believe the expression goes, a fish out of water. So, with that insight, we turn ourselves towards Elul and toward Tishrei and the high holidays and the new year. It's been a crazy year, to say the least. But it's not the worst the Jewish people have ever faced. Through the tides of history, through waves of oppression and persecution, with the shifting sands of time, and even in an ocean of assimilation and freedom, we have kept our armor intact. We've remained kosher. We've continued to move forward. We have more often than not learned to swim upstream, battling the current whenever it was necessary. So we continue to fulfill Yaakov's blessing and God's, that we continue to multiply and increase like the fish in the sea, and that we always remain like the head of the fish, as leaders and not as followers, and that we swim right into a new year, which has even more opportunity for us all to get together in good health and safety, to daven together, to learn together, to celebrate, share simchas together, and as peace continues to surface every now and again in Israel's neighborhood, that we all see more peace and more harmony in the world, in a world that God will renew for good and for peace and for health and good things for us, for our Kehillah, for Klal Yisrael and the world. Shabbos, a good Chodesh, Shana Tova Umetuka.